Welcome to the Asia Climate Finance podcast, where our host and expert guests delve into and scrutinise the pressing issues and emerging trends in climate business and climate finance. We greatly appreciate your support. Please like, review and subscribe to the podcast to help us grow and reach a wider audience. Be sure to take note of the disclaimers at the conclusion of each show. And now, here is your host, investor, analyst and author, Joseph Giacobelli.
Welcome to the Asia Climate Finance podcast. Thank you so much for joining us again. Episode 52 features a truly exceptional guest, one of Asia's preeminent thinkers on the environment and climate change, Professor Christine Loh. Currently, Chief Development Strategist at the Institute of the Environment at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, or HKUS, one of the world's leading universities. Professor Loh has an unparalleled background. Please do read Professor Loh's unique bio in the show notes. I had the pleasure of meeting Professor Loh face-to-face in Hong Kong for this discussion. In this first part, we discuss the crucial topic of climate business and finance education and capacity building. I started the conversation by asking Professor Loh about what exactly the Institute for the Environment at HKUS is, and as you'll soon discover, the Institute's work goes far beyond that of a traditional think tank. Enjoy this first part of the discussion.
Right. Well, I'm with the Institute for the Environment at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, and I have a very special and very privileged job because my role is to look around the university and see what's there relating to the environment, so sustainability, climate science, and even some of the civil engineering work. I look and see who's doing what, and actually there are many outstanding scholars and experts at universities. But what they do may not be very well known in the community. And what they do, even at quite a mature stage, may not be known by either government or the private sector. So my job is to look around, see what somebody in government or in the private sector may wish to know, or maybe in the community sector. So I try to introduce people to each other. I try to introduce projects to people who might find it interesting. I try to get some of our scholars involved in projects outside the university, because the good work of the university, one is obviously through publication and scholarship, but I think there's an increasing interest by scholars to also get their work out on a more applied basis, particularly the more mature scholars who no longer have to survive, to advance, to they're beyond just publishing. And it's a very privileged job because I get to see a lot of things, I get to talk to a lot of people, and actually create some excitement, both in government and in the private sector, in the university sector.
So the function of the Institute is not just to kind of congregate all of the climate-related resources or, ESG or whatever it is that you want to call it, and come up with new teaching tools or whatever. It's actually to come up with projects, ventures.
Well, I'm not the only person in the Institute. So if people go into the website of the Institute, you see many scholars from across the university. My job is very special. I mean, the Institute is a gathering place for scholarships, to congregate, to engage with others, and so on. But my particular job is to go beyond the usual kind of engagement, to really actively use our projects, use our various types of research, and really engage with others, or maybe bring problems that outside of the university have into the university and see how we could assist in solving problems.
So could you give some couple of concrete examples maybe, so that we may better understand?
Absolutely.
I mean, I know there are some universities who have the venture capital kind of arm, but this sounds a little bit different.
That's quite right. This is not the bits that are going to be spun off, right, and for investments and so on. So I give you one example. We have a funded research project that looks at Hong Kong as an international finance center. And this project has numerous sub-projects, one of which is a problem that I think Hong Kong has wanted to solve for a very long time, which is being a high-density city with a lot of existing buildings. These buildings actually need to be retrofitted, and you can decarbonize decarbonize them at the same time. The question is, how can you really do it at scale? The focus for this particular project is twofold. One is, can you come up with some technological usage to do it maybe in a more efficient way? It doesn't have to be like a moonshot, right? Can you do it better? Secondly is, how about the financing? How can we use financing to assist in the scaling up of retrofit in existing buildings? So my job is to look at the ideas coming from the engineers and the scientists on what to do, introduce that and work with contractors, because we're not contractors. So to also, our scientists can measure while things are going on, so we can show the before and the after. So that's one, the sort of more technical side. And another side is really the money. How can we really scale this up? How many ways are there to do it? So there is both an engineering and science professor looking after the technical bit, and there is a finance professor from the business school looking at, how do we finance this at scale? So my job is to, at one end, look for data, where it's embedded, work with some of my very geeky people at the university to use, you could say, AI tools, big data tools, to troll around and look for data and play around with data. And another way is to go and talk to bankers, and say, are you interested in this sort of thing? Can we get together and see how you would do it? How would you work with the academic sector to kind of think through these various things? Talk to people who have buildings who might be interested. So my job has been to bring all of these pieces together. And at the same time as I'm doing it, what I find is I've become a bit of a advocacy campaigner. And I guess if someone was on the outside, they might not know our project, but they'll see, Professor Loh, you're out there trying to stick all of this together. So I'm like trying to be the glue that stick people and ideas and technology together so that we can show on a much bigger scale how to solve this problem by bringing a lot of people, multidiscipline, into having conversation and working together.
So I guess I'll ask one of the many silly questions, which is, it sounds incredibly complicated, given that you are dealing with different individuals with different kind of competencies and focuses on top of it. What is the glue?
We have to learn to talk to each other, because financiers and engineers and climate scientists, right, they have not always been talking to each other. And I think this is one of those rare occasions where we actually need all of them to solve the problem. We're at the stage where people are now beginning to see how they need to work together. And we hope that in the next half year to 1 year, we actually will be working together to discuss how we look at the financing at scale. So I'm quite excited myself because I've met a lot of people. They've met a lot of each other. And I think now they've talked to each other enough to maybe go the next stage. The other thing about this is because it does require some serious thinking over time, right? It requires some dedication of putting time to think about this. Not everybody is ready for that. So for me, because it's part of a project, I also need to look for those people who are particularly interested in this problem and are willing to put time in this problem. So it's also important to continue to identify stakeholders out there, both in the public and the private sector, who wants to sit together and work together. So in a way, I'm trying to put teams of people together to work together.
The repercussions, and I mean that in a positive way, I mean the conclusions of the study would be absolutely incredible for countries, especially like old Europe, where you have a lot of very old buildings, and I'm talking about 200, 300, even 400-year-old buildings, and you're trying to retrofit that, good luck. So there's a lot of work that has been going on, as you probably know, in Europe too. So it's a very, very fascinating. And I think another project was the carbon calculator, if I remember correctly.
Yes, this is another marvelous project. We were actually asked by the Securities and Futures Commission, together with the Monetary Authority, which are the financial regulators in Hong Kong, whether the university sector could help with putting a carbon calculator and estimator for SMEs. The regulators looked around and talked to various people in different universities and kind of decided that we at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology would be the most suitable to work with them. So anyway, we went through a process where my colleagues kind of came up with an idea how to do it, but we were focused on the SMEs. So we spent actually quite a lot of time talking to the financial regulators because they were hoping at the beginning that it might be possible to use kind of published corporate data, find some formula, and just use that, and then you get the carbon calculations. And we said to them, as a matter of first principles, that wouldn't work because you really need to go after the carbon itself. And looking at P&L account and sales volume and whatever, that really ain't going to do it. And so anyway, after a period of exchange of views, we actually came up with a calculator using a certain method. We could show that there was correlation between emissions and the energy that they actually use. I mean, it isn't anything groundbreaking. But what was new was that we tested it with SMEs. We used local data. So the data doesn't come from maybe some external calculations of kind of global emissions, and you turn it down to everybody could be using it. That's right. So we actually used local data. We went to SMEs. We asked them whether they would use it, under what circumstances they would use it, because there's really two layers of question here. One is the calculator simple enough for you to input real data, right? So we worked out that we could probably teach a company how to do that in 15, 20 minutes.
Wow.
So, because it's very simple. And But what was different was you can show someone and say, do you think you could do that, so many times a year, right? And the answer was, yeah, I think I now know how to do it. Thank you very much, right? And then you say, well, would you do it? Now, that's a completely different question. They'd say, well, what is it? What is in it for my company to do this, right? So in a way, you are now going into the psychology of small companies, whether they would do it. So there has to be a step. We were just the creator of a gizmo, right? But you need some institutional support to actually go and pitch it to the SMEs on a continuous basis if you want tens of thousands of them to actually use it. So we're now here at this stage in Hong Kong where the thing has been invented, right? And we know it works. We know SMEs can use it. We know how they will gather the data and so on. But we now need to work with the government, who might appoint, some unit to actually go and kind of do a sales pitch to all the SMEs. And I think that's very important because the data, there's so much data out there, and if you want SMEs, which will end up being Scope 3 data for the bigger companies, you've got to go and bring that community together. And that's not technology. That's going out talking to people, and you need a campaign to do that sort of thing. So we're there right now, and I hope in the coming months the government would somehow find the right body or create a little unit that can do that.
This is something close to my heart because I think a lot of people don't just not misjudge but underestimate the importance of the SMEs.
Yes.
And then the issue with the SME is that you're a small company by definition, say, for example, a backpack maker in Shenzhen with very low margins, and we're talking about gross margins of maybe 5% or something, and net margins of maybe 1 or 2%.
Yes.
And you're asking them to do the extra work.
Yes.
For something they don't really grasp or understand. So that kind of education from the government, from whoever, becomes extremely crucial.
That's right. That's right. And a university cannot do it,
yes.
Right? So, but we see what is necessary because we've tested it with quite a few SMEs. We know what is in their thinking. So, and we know that what we ask them to input, it's actually relatively straightforward, and they're directly related to carbon emissions. So they all have bills, right, that they've paid for fuels, for electricity, anything related to energy. And for an SME, usually that is 60 to 70% of their carbon emissions. So if you go to an SME and ask them something relatively simple, right? We just need you every period, right? Whatever it is, you wanted them to do it once a quarter, once a year, once every 6 months, whatever it is, the period, that they can just take that bill out and plug in the number. And the calculator automatically calculates it to say this is your emissions because we know what is in your grid and so on, because that's all information we can put in the calculator. So actually they say, we have someone in the back office who makes payments, right? They actually have all these bills because they need all these bills for their audit. So it's not that difficult for them to plug in a number once every so often, right? And you're only asking them to plug in a few numbers, but it's 60 or 70%, if not more, of their carbon emissions. So what we're saying is start there. Don't ask them to do all the hard stuff yet. That will give you a base, and once they know how to do that, and they're doing it regularly, you can add other things to it. But start simple, because if you give them a thing that has 20 questions on it, they wouldn't do it. But our thing only asks them 3 or 4 questions, and they know they can do it. So that's the psychology of this, is not to be too complex at the beginning.
I think that's a secret. So the next challenge then is, how do you educate the SMEs? And you were saying that you've had some exposure as part of, I guess, the pilot project. You were talking to some of the companies.
That's right.
And then this is going to be driven by government. But what about that bridge of, workshops or whatever it is?
You're asking exactly the right question. Now, what we are finding is SMEs are being asked by their customers. So, maybe this little company that is making this little small thing, right, they're selling this to someone.
It's part of the value chain.
That's right. It's part of the supply chain. And they're finding that there's more questions about the data that they have to provide. So, in a way, the carbon calculator can help all of these people, right? If you use it And if the government kind of recognizes this as something to encourage the SMEs to use it, the SMEs will feel, oh, that there is some kind of endorsement, right? Now, the government needs to show that endorsement. Is it through some kind of a mark, or some kind of confirmation that they have used it? You don't have to guarantee their emissions, but you kind of give them a sense that, oh, if I did this, then I can give this to my buyer, right, who wants more information. Then the SME says, well, I'm willing to do it. I can do that. So you've got to go and make that link so it's worth their while. And someone, and I think it should be someone in the public sector that endorses some kind of community outreach, right, to the SMEs, so that you can do that through SMEs associations, trade bodies, and so on, right, where you have to kind of talk to the SMEs who are their members, right, to tell them that you can do this. This takes months of dedicated outreach, but it's not like it has never been done before. These trade associations, in fact, they do that kind of stuff all the time. They rally their members to come and say, hey, here's a new regulation, or here's something now you have to do. So this is one of the things that we can work with all of these people to share that this is something that is good for the SMEs.
So we'll have a conversation specifically about policy in the next podcast, but in terms of policy, do you think that the government should be, or some kind of government-driven regulator should be the entity which pushes for some kind of disclosure compliance, basically saying if you don't do it, you get whatever penalized? Or how do you think it should work on the policy side? Because as I was saying before, if I'm manufacturing backpacks in Shenzhen and my margin is already very thin, and I really don't have the bandwidth, I don't have the interest, definitely. But definitely, I don't even have the bandwidth to do it, unless there's a gun against my head which says, you must disclose that, because if you don't disclose it, this is the repercussions.
Well, obviously, if you're thinking at the regulatory end, where do you start? And I think my personal view, in having talked to all these SMEs, is if you start with regulation, and say, by such and such a date, you all have to report on this. That could work, right? And I think my sense also is it depends on what kind of political administrative system you come from. And I think in some places, you give it enough time, right? You give it enough campaigning and maybe some incentives and so on, it could work. Another way, if you're not yet ready to regulate, then another way is, you're pushing this voluntarily, but you signal, right? You signal to the community that eventually we want everyone in the economy, right, to report certain basic data. But we recognize there are hundreds and thousands of you guys out there, and we don't want to do it in one step. But we're signaling that, in the longer term, that's where we've got to go. And we recognize that we need to help everyone to get on that track. Because if you're missing that bit, then it's going to be a mess in any case, right? So, and you don't have to kind of get there right away, because you're bringing that little company from somewhere into actually what is the new data world, right? What is the new climate sustainability world that I think government has some duty, has some responsibility to co-create. But in creating it, you need to recognize what bit you should do to bring all these people along. So I think we're kind of starting at the simple end, and my advice is, let's get everybody in tune with this. Don't punish anybody at the moment, not right away. You want to make them feel you're helping them, because that's when we're most willing. And the pressure is kind of coming from up the supply chain in any case, right? So we use all of this to get people together.
We've reverse engineered this conversation a little bit because we went straight talking about the university and what the university is doing in the real world through the institute, real world meaning, real projects. But kind of stepping back a little bit, and there's a whole conversation about what people call education, and not education in the textbook side of things, but more the capacity building, in the sense that, as you know, I'm a big advocate of multidisciplinary approach. You need to understand a little bit of everything so that you can do your job. Whether it's a lawyer, would have to understand a little bit of finance and engineering. It doesn't have to be an expert, but just understand a little bit. So in terms of, as your role as a professor, how do you deal with that? How do you go beyond the textbook and convincing people that they've got to have a more a broader kind of look at everything related to climate?
Well, I think there are two ways of learning. One, which is the traditional way we've come through our school system, is here's some textbook, right? Here's what other people have already learned, and now you're going to learn it. But at some stage in all our career, you got to go and do it. And doing it, meaning you go and implement any great ideas, any great plans, you're in a different world altogether. This is not academic. This is about really connecting with people, understanding their difficulty, their interest, and how to stitch it all together. And if you are looking at our pool of students, there are people with a whole variety of different talents. There are those who are really good in the laboratory, doing the science and studying and calculations and so on. And there are those that are very good in going out. Now, you've got to combine these teams. They need to understand that to actually get something done, particularly in the commercial world, right? You're going to need a lot of different people to actually stitch something together. And I think actually students can do this because in our modern education system, there's a lot of internships, a lot of volunteer work. I mean, we're encouraging students to go and do that. We're also bringing in more and more people from the private sector to come and talk to students, what it's like in the real world. I mean, I think one of the most common questions from students is, well, I've learned all this, but how does it really work out in the workplace, right? So now, professors, I'm a professor of practice. I'm not at the scholarly role, the academic role. We want our students to also understand the scholarly role, what that is like, then the practice role, and then bring in other professionals and business people and entrepreneurs, right? They're all quite different in sentiments. So to expose that to students today, and one of the things that I find exciting, which I'm working on right now, is how to design new syllabuses, because I think people value multidisciplinary, but what does that really mean? And how do you do that in the classroom? So I'm trying to work with other professors to have new multidisciplinary type of teaching. So for example, I've partnered up with a very distinguished climate scientist in now teaching a course called Climate Change, a multidisciplinary approach. So apart from having the climate science there, we're bringing in many other types of disciplines so the students can see how the science actually could apply to different bits of different types of professions. Like what about if you're a building owner? Or you're a built environment professional. What about if you're in finance? What about if you're in public health? And so on and so forth. So that gives the students a very, it's not deep, but it's very broad.
So that then they can put whatever they want to specialize in into the bigger picture.
Well, the students, so if you're doing a master's degree, that's a couple of years of your time. you have to take many courses. Some are mandatory, and many of them are electives, right? So they have many, many things to choose from. So a broad course gives them a broad view, and then they can choose to go into much deeper electives as well. So I think it helps the students to see a much wider range of possibilities that they would encounter in the workplace.
Just a few days ago, I had probably one of the most enjoyable experiences of my life. I had a lecture at CDU, a university I guess you know well, the City University of Hong Kong, and it was for the students in the master's class, and I was asking the students just to gauge where they came from and what they were studying. And I had everything under the sun. I had mechanical engineering, robotics, computer science, environmental studies, business. And then I asked the professor, was my lecture like mandatory? That's why they came? He said, no, it's voluntary, if they want to. And I thought that was fantastic to see students from these different disciplines actually coming together and listening to this crazy Italian guy talking about climate finance and climate business and the outlook for that. And I think, maybe going forward, hopefully it'll be more people will do it.
Well, I'd like to think that you would do more of this kind of talk. There's a real thirst amongst master students in understanding something that they are so far from. But, all the sort of robotics, sustainability studies and so on, they're more on the technical science side.
Yes.
So, but they do understand they need to know something about the business world, and where would they get that? So I think in these broader talks that are made available to students, they actually have a thirst to listen to people who, understand sustainability, but come from a completely different sector, like finance.
One last question about this education subject, which I'm finding personally fascinating. So this is where we're at now. Looking, Professor Loh, where we were 5 or 10 years ago in terms of achieving exactly this purpose, which is teaching the students about the linkages and see where their piece of the puzzle kind of belongs. Where do you see things evolving 5 years from now? Do you think the general institutions are doing the right thing? I mean, the kind of institute, and one of the reasons I'm asking that is because the kind of institute that you've set up at, or you work at in HKUS, there aren't a lot of them around. If you look at, there's very, very few in European universities, very, very few in US universities. They all call it something different, climate, sustainability, and, impact, whatever it is. So how do you, based on your experience of the last 5-10 years, how do you see things evolving? What's your best guess, if you had a crystal ball?
Well, maybe I can just say something in 5 years, what courses I hope to see. Because these more multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary courses that, that I and others are trying to design, we want to have these become kind of the norm, that these electives are provided in a course. We don't know everything because we are, maybe only expert in a few things, right? So it does require us to go and bring colleagues together and also non-academics together. This means professors themselves have to learn, and we're seeing in the classroom what it is like for the students. Is this something that they find, useful? And if the answer is yes, which I'm quite positive about, are we missing something? Because, for example, I'll give you something I'm looking at right now. Our interdisciplinary approach to climate change, I'm seeing very good, yes, introducing lots of things, but there's always something missing because we only have so many weeks, right? So you have other electives that are maybe focused more on the finance side. If it is just more on finance, how do we put in the sustainability side and the science side? Because my own experience is, whilst you're never going to be a scientist, perhaps, you do need to understand some fundamentals in science about sustainability. Because in my dealings with many people in the finance sector, is that they're also struggling today. You know, they're saying, well, I've been in finance for 25 years, but I don't know anything about climate science. How do I make judgment on anything? You know, so there is actually also benefit by having graduate courses, postgraduate courses for professionals to come back. And can we kind of put younger students and kind of older students who can kind of co-learn and co-teach at the same time? You know, so in 5 years' time, I hope we'll be even better in creating courses which are dynamic, you know, because there are too many classes where the students are absorbing information rather than participating in the class, right? So I wonder whether it is possible for us to deepen that learning through much more active class time, and so that the students themselves can go after class, become fascinated by certain things, and do their own learning. But I think after we've done a few of these, we'll be able to assess how we can continue to create more impactful courses for the students.
So just like climate finance and climate business and climate-related regulation, we're still kind of at the evolutionary stage of this, and we're
moving into a new world, and the new world isn't structured like the one that is structured today, and the assumptions in our economic, financial, and regulatory systems are not cut out to revolutionize the world, to decarbonize, you know, to adapt to climate change, to be much more sustainable. It's not structured that way. So I think for us to really do it that way is actually turning everything upside down. It's a revolution. And so how do we, at the same time, think about the education? We need to help the younger people to get faster into the issue. I mean, we don't know how to do it because it is fiddling around with the existing system and co-learning at the same time.
Great, that's fantastic. Thank you very much for this conversation. I really, really appreciated it. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Asia Climate Finance Podcast. Please be advised that this podcast is presented for educational purposes only. None of the information provided should be construed in any way as investment advice. Always consult with a licensed investment professional before making any investment decisions. Additionally, please note that the views and opinions expressed by our guests are personal and may not reflect the views and opinions of their current or previous employers.